There are decisions that forever mark a person's life, and sometimes the world. For one filmmaker, that decision was to tell the story of Christ not as a tale softened by time, but as a deeply human, divine, and painfully real journey. When Mel Gibson chose to direct The Passion of the Christ, he didn't just make a movie, he walked into a storm. From the very beginning, there was no studio support, no safety net, no parade of producers clapping him on the back. In a world where the most ambitious film projects were backed by millions in marketing and media control, Gibson chose to invest $30 million of his own money, not to gain glory, but to honor a truth he felt burning in his spirit, a truth he could no longer ignore. Hollywood turned away, friends cautioned him, agents backed off, but something in him had shifted. This wasn't just cinema, it was calling. And when a person answers that kind of call, the world either leans in or turns away. With no corporate interference, Mel had creative freedom, something rare, something powerful. He made bold choices, filming entirely in ancient languages, Aramaic, Hebrew, Latin. To some, it seemed impractical, even foolish. But to him, it was necessary. The words spoken by Christ, his mother, the disciples, they would echo in the tongues of history. The audience would not just watch, but feel. Then came the casting, and with it, a moment that seemed less like coincidence and more like divine alignment. Jim Caviezel, a devout believer, was 33 years old, the same age as Christ during his crucifixion. His initials, J.C., like the man he would portray. When Gibson warned him about the spiritual and physical toll the role would bring, Caviezel didn't hesitate. He looked Gibson in the eye and said, "I was born to do this." That kind of commitment couldn't be rehearsed. It came from within. Production began in Matera, Italy, a hauntingly beautiful landscape, rugged and biblical in every sense. But beauty came with burden. The weather was punishing, the terrain unforgiving. There were no five-star trailers or Hollywood perks, just stone, wind, and the heavy silence of a place that remembered something sacred. Each day, the crew woke before dawn, wrapped in layers to shield against biting cold. Caviezel would prepare in silence, entering a state that many on set later described as otherworldly. He didn't just act, he became. Caviezel was not alone in feeling the weight of the story they were telling. Seasoned professionals, grips, makeup artists, sound engineers began to speak in hushed tones about a strange energy on set. Some said it was reverence, others said it was fear. A few said they had never felt so aware of the presence of something they couldn't name. The cameras rolled, capturing more than just performances. They captured truth, suffering, redemption. And then came the first sign, one that would shake even the most skeptical among them. During a rehearsal for the scourging scene, Caviezel was accidentally struck by a real whip. It wasn't planned, it wasn't fake. His flesh was torn. He fell. Silence fell heavier than any line ever spoken, but he got back up. Later, a bolt of lightning would strike, twice. Once, narrowly missing the actor. The second time, hitting the assistant director. No one could explain it. The sky had been clear. Equipment failed without reason. Wind would appear in sudden bursts, only to vanish the next moment. Strange figures were seen at a distance, cloaked shapes moving just out of reach, never found among the cast or crew. Still, no one left. Instead, something strange happened. The more the cast and crew were tested, the more injuries, fatigue, confusion, and fear they endured, the more united they became. They leaned into one another, shared meals in silence, prayed before scenes, cried during takes. Even those who had no religious belief began to ask questions about Christ, about the soul, about why they had agreed to be part of this project that now felt far larger than anything on the script. Mel Gibson remained steady, focused, unapologetic. He told them, "We are not making a film, we are testifying." And somewhere between bruises and miracles, between the silence of prayer and the chaos of filming, a kind of sacred flame began to burn through each of them. Not everyone would understand what was happening. Not everyone was meant to. But those who were there knew. They felt it in their bones, and they carried it with them long after the cameras stopped. What none of them knew then was that the strange occurrences had only just begun, and the most intense moments, both physical and spiritual, were still to come. If you felt something special reading this, we invite you to be part of our community. Click to subscribe and like the video. It's a simple gesture, but it brings us closer. This space is made with love and devotion to stories that inspire the soul. And if you feel touched, comment your name and city below. We'd love to greet you in our next video. The sun had barely risen when the crew returned to the rocky hills of Matera. The city, carved in stone and silence, echoed the ancient pain they were there to retell. And yet, something had shifted. The more they immersed themselves in the sacred narrative, the more the atmosphere began to change, not just emotionally, but tangibly. There was a sense that they were no longer alone. The temperature would plummet suddenly, even on clear mornings. The wind, soft one moment, would howl the next, like a warning whispered across centuries. Technical equipment would glitch without cause. Microphones caught voices that weren't there. Cameras would freeze and then resume without anyone touching them. And then came the visions, shadows dressed in robes from another time, glimpsed just at the edge of the eye, disappearing as soon as one tried to focus. Some whispered it was their imagination. Others began to pray. One of the first to break the silence was a sound technician, hardened by years in Hollywood, not one for mysticism. But one evening, as he sat alone on a slope, he claimed to see a figure in white robes kneeling in prayer near a distant olive tree. He called out, thinking it was an extra off-script. But when he and another crew member approached, no one was there. And the soil where the figure had been was warm, while the rest of the ground was chilled. Word spread quickly. The production was no longer just a set. It was becoming something sacred. Caviezel, already marked by physical wounds from previous scenes, began to experience intense moments of spiritual weight. During one take, as he delivered the words of Christ on the cross, he fell to his knees, not as part of the script, but because his legs gave out. He later described it as a force pushing him down, as if asking him to fully surrender. He wept, and the tears were not rehearsed. They were real, and the camera kept rolling. Mel Gibson didn't yell, "Cut." No one moved. It was as if the entire crew for those few moments stood on holy ground. Later, Caviezel confided in a makeup artist that he had been feeling an overwhelming peace, even amid the pain. "I don't understand it," he said, "but I feel like I'm not alone when I speak his words." Others began to report dreams, vivid, luminous dreams that didn't feel like dreams at all. A camera assistant described one in which he saw himself walking alongside a man in robes whose face he never saw, but whose presence filled him with indescribable calm. When he woke up, his hands were trembling. Actors of different faiths, or of none, started gathering before filming for moments of silence. Not prayer necessarily, but something close, something reverent. Something that acknowledged that they were touching something sacred, even if they couldn't name it. And then came the second lightning strike. Unlike the first, this one had no warning. The sky had been soft and blue, birds flying calmly overhead. But just as a scene began rolling, a quiet moment where Mary watched her son stumble with the cross, a sudden flash tore through the air and struck the assistant director. He survived. Shaken but unharmed. Caviezel was nearby again. Once more, the heavens had spoken. At this point, even skeptics grew quiet. No longer could these be dismissed as coincidences. People began to carry rosaries in their pockets. Others wore crosses tucked into their coats. Some wrote down the strange occurrences in personal journals. But no one wanted to stop, because now it wasn't just a film, it was a mission. Mel Gibson continued to push the vision forward. He insisted that every detail remain authentic: wooden crosses, hand-carved, costumes woven in the style of ancient Judea, scenes shot in bitter cold to match the suffering they aimed to portray. No compromise, because he believed the weight of the truth required the same weight in sacrifice. As the production deepened, so did the mystery. And yet, through the fog of pain and the shadows of the unexplained, something glorious began to glow beneath the surface. It wasn't about fear anymore, it was about purpose, about something unseen guiding their hands, steadying their hearts, and preparing them for what would come next. Because the most difficult scenes had not yet been filmed, and with them, the most intense spiritual awakenings were still ahead. If this story moved you, we invite you to like the video and become part of our community. Your presence here means the world to us. This is more than content. It's a space of light and faith. Click to subscribe and let's walk together in this journey. Also, comment Amen below if you wish to receive blessings. And please tell us which city you're watching from. We'd love to include your name in our prayers and send you a special blessing in our next video. The day they filmed the crucifixion began like any other. Early calls, quiet murmurs, people wrapping themselves in thick jackets as they stepped into the wind-whipped hills. But the air that morning was different, heavier, as if the very earth knew what would be reenacted upon it. Jim Caviezel stood silently, eyes closed, the wooden cross pressed against his back. It wasn't light, it wasn't hollow, it was real, rough-hewn, heavy and splintered. Every step he took felt like a reenactment, but for many on set, it looked like something more. No one spoke, no one dared to disturb the sacred stillness of that moment. Then action was called. The path was rocky and steep. The costume team had carefully distressed Caviezel's garments, but what stained them now was not paint. It was blood. Real blood. As he stumbled and fell, the weight of the cross dislocated his shoulder. His scream, captured forever in the final cut, was not acting. It was pain, honest, raw, and yet he didn't stop. Those watching from behind the cameras froze. Some covered their mouths, others lowered their heads. No one intervened. Caviezel had made it clear, no matter what happened, he didn't want to break character. He wasn't just playing Jesus. He was offering himself to the moment, and perhaps to something beyond. In that instant, people wept. Not because they were watching a film being made, but because something inside them broke. For a brief moment, every layer of detachment peeled away. They weren't crew, they weren't actors, they were witnesses. Later, as the crew reviewed the footage, the silence lingered. One cinematographer, normally precise and detached, stepped away and sat alone for over an hour, just staring at the ground. When asked what was wrong, he replied simply, "I felt it. I don't even know what it was, but I felt it." The suffering continued. Caviezel endured the cold with a body already bruised and battered from days of filming. The wind would whip through the open fields and sting his skin like needles. His lips turned blue, his hands cramped, but still he pressed on. Every flagellation, every stumble, every gaze upward carried a depth that no one could explain. A doctor on set advised him to take a break. He refused. "If he carried it," Caviezel said, "I can carry this." And perhaps the most powerful thing was what happened not in front of the camera, but between takes. A young actor who had never read the Bible before approached him quietly. "How do you not break down?" he asked. Caviezel, his lips cracked and his voice barely audible, replied, "I do, every time. That's why I keep going." There was something in his eyes, a mix of exhaustion and peace that silenced all doubt. The makeup artists often had difficulty separating real wounds from fake ones. The blood on his back, shoulders, and face would run in rivulets, and even when they tried to clean him, fresh bruises would appear beneath. It no longer felt like just a production. It had become something sacred, an offering. Other actors, too, began to feel the shift. Pedro Sarubi, who played Barabbas, described the moment he stood across from Caviezel, looking into his eyes. "I saw compassion," he would later say, "not from the actor, but from the man he was portraying." He couldn't explain it rationally, only that in that moment, something touched him deeply. Luca Lionello, the actor playing Judas, was known for his skepticism. But as filming progressed, something in him began to change. He would stay behind after wrap, sitting in the silence of the set. He asked for a Bible. He asked for space to pray. By the end of production, he asked for baptism. Something powerful had begun to stir, not just in the story they were telling, but in the people telling it. Faith wasn't being preached, it was being lived. The pain was real, the cost was high, but so was the beauty. And as the days wore on and the wounds deepened on the body, on the spirit, so too did the conviction that they were doing something eternal, not for accolades, not for fame, but for truth. And truth, when touched by faith, has the power to change everything. What none of them yet realized was that their suffering had just begun, and with it, the most unexpected transformations would soon unfold. By the fourth week of filming, the atmosphere on set had shifted completely. The hills around Matera, once neutral backdrops of ancient stone, now felt alive, watching, listening. The team had grown quiet, more reverent. Some brought scriptures to read between takes. Others simply stared into the distance, as if waiting for something they couldn't explain. The inexplicable had become common. It began with the winds, sudden, violent gusts that came out of nowhere, sweeping across the landscape just before filming particularly emotional scenes. One afternoon, during a moment of silence before a scene with Mary at the foot of the cross, the wind rose so abruptly it knocked over a lighting rig and extinguished all nearby candles. When the gust ended, everything was still, utterly still. So quiet even the birds had stopped. Then came the failures, equipment that stopped functioning during key takes. Cameras with fresh batteries died mid-recording. Microphones picked up static that formed brief, garbled phrases no one could explain. The sound team began to joke nervously, saying things like, "It's not us, it's him." But no one laughed very long. Something was happening. There were stories whispered over lunch breaks. A crew member saw someone walking near the edge of the hill, an old man with a staff, robed in white. But when they went to greet him, he was gone. Another swore she saw a young boy kneeling by the cross just before dawn, eyes full of sorrow. The security team had no record of anyone entering or leaving. The most unsettling event, however, happened during a night shoot. Caviezel had just finished a particularly grueling scene. Nails driven into his hands, arms stretched wide, and the crew was preparing to move into the next setup. As he rested on the cross, a figure in the shadows caught the eye of a lighting technician. A woman veiled in black was standing still near the edge of the light, watching. He called out, thinking she was a local who had wandered onto the set. But she didn't move. As he and another crew member approached, the lights flickered. For a moment, everything dimmed, and then she vanished, not into the night. She simply wasn't there anymore. The air was cold, their hands trembled, and when they returned to the others, no one could speak for several minutes. Word of these sightings spread quietly but deeply. Some dismissed them, others took them as signs. Caviezel himself seemed to become more withdrawn, more prayerful. He carried a rosary at all times, often clutching it between scenes. "Something is walking with us," he once whispered to the director. "I feel it." And he wasn't alone. Other actors began sharing similar experiences. One had dreams of ancient doors opening to bright light. Another felt unseen hands on her shoulders during moments of intense emotion. A makeup artist, while touching up Caviezel's wounds, felt tears well up in her eyes for no reason at all. "I don't know what came over me," she said later, "but it felt like grief, not mine, his. Mel Gibson, ever focused, acknowledged the shift. "This story has power," he said one morning to the crew, "and power doesn't go unnoticed in the spiritual world." Despite the unease, no one wanted to leave. On the contrary, many felt drawn even deeper. Like pilgrims, not professionals, the pain was becoming prayer. The whispers, signs, and strange occurrences only fueled their determination. Even those who came to the set indifferent were now leaning into the silence, into the stillness, into the unseen. They no longer questioned if something divine was present. They began to wonder what it wanted to show them next. By now, the lines between cinema and sacredness had blurred entirely. The production was no longer just about portraying a story from Scripture. It had become, for many, a living encounter with the divine. And the most extraordinary transformations weren't occurring in the scenes being filmed, but in the souls of those holding the cameras, applying the makeup, moving the lights. One by one, hearts began to stir. It started quietly. A grip assistant who had never spoken about faith before was seen praying silently at the edge of the set during lunch. A costume designer, raised without any belief, began to bring a small Bible each day, reading it in the stillness between takes. These weren't acts of performance or show. They were intimate, deep, private awakenings blooming in silence. Pedro Sarubi, the actor cast as Barabbas, was known for his intensity. He had spent years in theater, immersed in dramatic roles, but nothing had prepared him for the moment he stood face to face with Caviezel as Jesus. The script demanded rage, but what he saw in Caviezel's eyes stopped him cold. "They weren't acting," he would later say. "There was something in his eyes that pierced me. It was as if compassion, real divine compassion, looked at me through him." After that scene, Sarubi walked off set and sat alone for over an hour. He didn't speak. He cried. His life would not be the same. The same was true for Luca Lionello, the man playing Judas. Known for his skepticism and even self-declared atheism, he had joined the film as just another job. But as the days passed, something began to crack inside him. He became quieter, more withdrawn. He started staying behind after filming, sitting in silence on the very rocks where scenes of betrayal and despair had been reenacted. He spoke little, but his face said everything. On the final week of production, he asked to be baptized. Others followed, not in dramatic declarations but in subtle shifts. A cameraman who had long mocked religion now found himself weeping during the crucifixion takes. A production assistant, raised in a household hostile to faith, began writing prayers in a notebook, not knowing exactly to whom she spoke, but needing to speak nonetheless. What had begun as a film had turned into a revival of the soul. And not because anyone was preaching, it was the silence, the mystery, the sacredness that hung in the air and clung to the skin. It was the rawness of the story they were telling and the way that story was echoing in their own lives. They weren't just witnessing Christ's suffering, they were experiencing something of his love. One evening, Caviezel sat with a few crew members by the fire, his face pale from the day's filming. He spoke quietly, without performance. "He didn't come to condemn," he said. "He came to love, and somehow, I feel that love here, right here." No one replied. But in that stillness, something sacred passed between them. Something ancient, something eternal. The weather continued to shift mysteriously. Sometimes, after filming a scene of deep anguish, the clouds would part and light would break through in a way that seemed perfectly timed, almost choreographed. Other times, moments of joy were punctuated by sudden winds or the cry of birds overhead. It was as if the world itself responded. By the time the final week arrived, people had stopped asking, "Why is this happening?" and had started asking, "What is this trying to show me?" Faith, once abstract, now took root, but not without cost. The road ahead would demand more pain, more sacrifice, more surrender, and the next scenes, they would take them to the very edge. If this touched something deep inside you, take a moment to like this video and join our community. We believe stories like this carry the power to heal, uplift, and reconnect you to what truly matters. Subscribe and stay close. We walk this journey together. Comment Amen below to receive a blessing and share with us your city. We're lifting names in prayer, one by one, with love and sincerity. The scene had been rehearsed, but the weight of it could never truly be prepared for. It was the crucifixion, raw, unfiltered, agonizing. Not a dramatized version, not softened for comfort. It was, as Mel Gibson insisted, as close to the truth as we dare show. A Caviezel stood nailed to the cross, not symbolically, but suspended for hours, his body strained and his breath shallow. The makeup team had worked for hours that morning, layering wounds over wounds, painting bruises that hid bruises already forming from earlier takes. But by now, much of what stained his skin wasn't makeup. It was real blood, real cold, real pain. He trembled against the wind. The sky was grey, and though no forecast had predicted it, a light drizzle began to fall. It wasn't heavy, it was quiet, like tears from above. The crew filmed in silence. No one called out, no jokes were made. The only sound was the shuffle of footsteps on gravel and the occasional sob from someone off camera. They were watching more than a performance. They were watching a man surrender. A medic on site approached during a break and whispered, "You need rest." Caviezel nodded but didn't climb down. "Just give me one more take," he said. "If he could give everything, I can give this." That take lasted nearly 20 minutes. In that moment, something changed. Not just in him, but in those around him. An actor playing a Roman soldier, tasked with mocking Jesus from below, broke down crying during the take. His voice cracked, his hands shook. He couldn't deliver the lines. Afterward, he stepped away and sat with his face in his hands, whispering, "I can't be cruel to him, not even for the film." Others felt it too. It was as if their hearts were being peeled open. There was no barrier between what they were enacting and what they were becoming. Every nail, every shout, every lash delivered earlier in filming now echoed through their bodies with a haunting awareness. This happened, and we're retelling it with our lives. The crucifixion scene took days. 3 full days under wind, sun, and rain. Caviezel endured muscle cramps, hypothermia, and even a near heart failure. He was hospitalized briefly, but he returned, always. He told the crew, "There is no resurrection without the cross. We must finish." And so they did. But as they filmed those final moments, Christ lifting his gaze, speaking his last breath, nature itself seemed to rise with him. The winds howled, the sky turned darker. One of the crosses supporting an actor cracked loudly, startling everyone. Birds scattered. A feeling of awe swept over the set like a veil. When the final line was delivered, "It is finished," many felt something inside them fall silent, not broken, transformed. That night, no one celebrated. There were no parties, no wrap-up toasts. People simply sat together, many in silence, others softly weeping. A camera operator, usually stoic and technical, walked up to Gibson and said, "I didn't believe in anything before this, but now I feel like I've been seen." It wasn't just a film anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. It was a mirror, a prayer, a reminder. Something sacred had passed through them. And yet, just as they reached the darkest moment of the narrative, just when death had seemingly won, the whisper of hope began to rise. They were about to film the resurrection. The tomb was dark, cold, carved from stone. There were no grand speeches, no music, no applause. Just silence, thick and ancient, the kind that makes even seasoned actors feel the need to whisper. The scene was simple: a body, wrapped and lifeless, resting in stillness. But behind the camera, everyone could feel it. This was not the end. In many ways, it was the first time the cast and crew breathed again after days of intense suffering. The crucifixion had left them physically and spiritually raw. Their emotions were drained. Some carried bruises, others stories they would never fully speak of. And yet, now, as they prepared to film the resurrection, something unspoken passed between them. It was like the sun rising inside the soul. Mel Gibson approached the scene with a quiet reverence. No dramatic instruction, no emotional build-up, just a nod, a stillness, as if letting the divine speak for itself. Caviezel lay in place, motionless, his body cold from the stone beneath him. And then, on cue, his eyes opened. But what emerged was not just a man waking up, it was a message. The camera captured his face, bathed in soft light, his expression calm, steady, filled with a quiet power. He rose slowly, the burial cloth falling away like the last remnant of death. There were no special effects, no lightning bolts, only light, and a silence so full it seemed to sing. The crew held their breath, and in that breath, faith took root. Some wept, others placed hands on their hearts. A few closed their eyes, overwhelmed by a peace they couldn't explain. It wasn't acting. It wasn't lighting. It was something else, something sacred pouring into the cracks of every open soul. As Caviezel stepped forward, the lens followed. His gaze never directly met the camera, but those who later watched the footage said they felt as though he was looking right into them, past them even, into something deeper. A veteran camera assistant who had grown skeptical over years in the industry whispered, "I saw him, not Jim, him." The rest of that day was unlike anything that had come before. Laughter returned, soft at first, like sunlight peeking through storm clouds. Crew members embraced, conversations flowed again. It was as if the weight that had settled over them for weeks had finally lifted, replaced by something lighter, warmer, eternal. One woman from the costume department, normally reserved, was seen spinning slowly in the field nearby, arms wide to the sky, her face tilted upward. When asked what she was doing, she smiled with tears and said, "I'm thanking him." The resurrection had changed everything, not only on screen, but in real life. It reminded them that after every night, there is morning, that after every cross, there is a rising. The cast and crew, now deeply bonded by something far greater than art, didn't want it to end, not because of fame or pride, but because of the presence. The undeniable feeling that they had been invited into something sacred, and that leaving it meant leaving a piece of themselves behind. And yet, they knew their mission was not to stay. It was to carry the light they had encountered into a world that desperately needed it. Because the true resurrection wasn't just in that final scene, it would be in every heart that watched the film and dared to believe again. What followed next was unexpected. Some might even call it prophetic. If this chapter touched your spirit, we lovingly invite you to like this video and subscribe. Here, we're not just sharing stories, we're building a home for hearts that seek truth, light, and healing. You belong here. Comment Amen to receive a special blessing and tell us the city where you live. We're lifting up names in prayer and sending love across the distance. The cameras had stopped rolling. The final scene had been captured, but no one moved. The quiet that followed wasn't like the silence of fatigue. It was sacred, as if heaven itself had lingered a few more moments, wrapping each soul on that set in a gentle embrace. No one rushed to tear down the lights or pack up gear. They stood in stillness, with eyes damp and hearts trembling. A journey that had begun as a film project had become something far greater. For many, the Passion of the Christ was meant to be a retelling, but what it became was a rebirth. Not just for the audience who would eventually watch it, but for the very people who made it. Technicians, actors, extras, artists, coordinators, Every person who stepped onto that set left carrying something they hadn't arrived with. Some carried healing, others questions, many carried hope. Caviezel, whose body bore the marks of real pain endured during filming, spoke during the rap gathering. His voice was soft, but steady. "I will never be the same," he said. "And I don't want to be. I gave what I could, but what I received was so much more." There was no applause, only tears, hugs, and a sense that something had ended, but something greater had begun. Later, in interviews, stories began to emerge. Crew members who had found faith, families of cast members who felt drawn to prayer, viewers who watched the film and reported experiencing moments of stillness they couldn't explain, moments where they felt something they hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. Churches screened it. Universities debated it. Critics challenged it. But beyond the noise, the film did what it was always meant to do. It brought hearts back to the cross. And more importantly, it reminded the world that the story didn't end there. Because the story of Jesus is not just about death, it is about life. A life offered freely, a love poured out beyond measure, a forgiveness that asks nothing but faith. The legacy of the Passion of the Christ isn't written in film history or box office numbers. It is written in spirit, in souls, in moments of quiet reflection when someone alone in a room, watching a scene, suddenly feels seen, forgiven, loved. And if you, reading or watching this now, feel even a flicker of that love in your chest, know that it's not by chance. Something divine is reaching for you. And this is your moment to open your heart and say yes, not to a movie, not to a story, but to Him. If this journey has touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe. We're more than a channel. We're a community of faith, light, and shared purpose. You are so welcome here, and we're grateful to walk this path with you. Comment Amen to receive your blessing and tell us the city you live in. We will pray for you with love and mention your name in our next video. You are not alone. And now, don't stop here. There is another video waiting for you, one that could be revelador and glorious in your life. Just click on the video that's now appearing on your screen. What you'll discover next might be exactly what your heart has been waiting for. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for believing. Amen.